I still remember the exact weight of the coffee cup in my hand the morning I found out. Not the words, not the phone, the cup. It was the blue ceramic one Victoria hated because I bought it at a gas station on a road trip 7 years ago, back when we still took road trips. I was holding it, warm against my palm, standing in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, and her phone lit up on the counter next to mine. Same charger. We shared one for years, and a message slid across the screen. It said, "Is he gone to the airport yet? I can't wait to have the bed to myself with you tonight." The name at the top said, Arthur, and under it, a little heart. She'd put a heart next to his name. Now here's the thing I want you to sit with before I tell you the rest. If you were standing in that kitchen at 6 in the morning, holding a coffee cup, and you saw that message light up your wife's phone, what would you do? Would you throw the cup? Would you scream her name down the hallway? Would you march into the bedroom and shake her awake and demand the truth? Most people think they'd explode. Most people are wrong. Because the loudest thing I've ever felt in my life happened in complete silence. I didn't drop the cup. I didn't make a sound. I finished my coffee. And that quiet, that terrible calm quiet, is where this whole story really begins. So let me ask you one more time before we go on. Would you have noticed? And once you knew, could you have stayed that calm? My name is Marcus. I was 34 the morning I read that message. I'd been married to Victoria for 9 years, together for 11. We met in a bookstore, which sounds like a lie now, like something you make up to make your life seem softer than it was. But it's true. She reached for a paperback on a high shelf, and I reached at the same time, and our hands touched. And I stammered something stupid, and she laughed. And that laugh got me for 11 years. I built things around that laugh. A house. A savings account. A whole life. Arthur was her boss. Well, technically her boss's business partner. He ran the property investment side of the firm where Victoria worked as an office manager. I'd met him twice. Once at a company dinner where he shook my hand too hard and looked at me like I was furniture. And once at a Christmas party where he called me the husband 3 times, like I didn't have a name. Big watch, bigger car. The kind of man who talks about wine like he invented it. I remember thinking he was ridiculous. I remember Victoria defending him in the car on the way home. He's just confident, Marcus. Not everyone can afford to be shy. I laughed it off. I actually laughed. That morning, I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup. I set it on the drying rack the way I always did, handle facing left, because Victoria liked things neat, and I'd stopped fighting her on the small things years ago. Then I picked up my bag, because I really was flying out that morning. I had a work trip to Denver, 2 nights, a supplier conference. She knew that. Arthur knew that. They'd been counting on it. And I remember standing at the front door with my hand on the knob, and Victoria came out in her robe, hair a mess, and she kissed my cheek and said, "Text me when you land, okay? Drive safe." Drive safe. I was flying. She didn't even know how I was getting there. And that was the moment, not the message. The message was just paper. That was the moment something in me went very still and very clear. Because she looked right at me and she lied with her whole face, and it cost her nothing. I got in the car. I drove to the airport. I sat in the terminal with a bad coffee, and I did not cry. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a story like this to have a crying scene early, a man breaking down in a bathroom stall. It didn't happen. What happened was worse. I felt myself go cold and organized, like a machine powering on. I opened my laptop and I started a document. I titled it something boring, Q3 expenses, so it would live safely on my screen for months. And on the first line, I typed one word, everything. And then I started writing down everything I knew, and everything I didn't, and everything I was going to find out. Here's what I want you to understand about me. I'm not a dramatic man. I install and maintain climate control systems for commercial buildings. I'm the guy who notices when one room is half a degree too warm and fixes it before anyone complains. I've spent my whole career being invisible and precise. I know how to watch a system fail slowly. I know the sound a thing makes right before it breaks. And I realized, sitting in that terminal, that my marriage had been making that sound for a long time, and I'd been turning up the music so I wouldn't hear it. The late nights she blamed on quarterly reports. The perfume she started wearing that I didn't buy. The phone that used to sit face up on the table and now lived face down. Always face down, like it was hiding. The way she'd started saying we less and I more. The trip to the coast last spring with the girls, that came back on a credit card statement as one hotel room, one name, and I'd let her explain it away in 11 seconds. I let her. That's the part that still makes my jaw tight. I handed her the excuse. I said, "Oh, you probably just split it and put it on your card." And she said, "Exactly. Exactly." So, on that plane to Denver, I didn't plan revenge. I want to be clear about that too, because that's what everybody wants. The fireworks, the public humiliation, the moment you make them pay. That's not what I planned. I planned to disappear, not run away, not vanish in the night like a coward. I planned to build a wall so quietly, so patiently, that by the time she noticed it, she'd already be standing on the wrong side of it, alone. The first thing I did in Denver was call my brother David. He's a lawyer, family practice, the kind who tells you things you don't want to hear in a very calm voice. I told him everything in the hotel room with the curtains open, the city lights below me. There was a long pause, and then he said, "The thing I'll never forget," he said, "Marcus, before you do anything, do you want her to know you know?" And I said no, and he said, "Good, then don't slip, not once, because the second she knows you know, she gets to control the story. Right now, you control it. That's the only power you have. Don't spend it early." So I didn't. I flew home 2 days later, and I walked in the door, and I hugged her, and I asked about her week, and I listened to her lie about the reports, and I said, "You work too hard." And she smiled and put her head on my shoulder, and I looked at the top of her blonde head, and I felt absolutely nothing, which frightened me more than pain would have. Because pain means you still have something to lose. Nothing means you've already started letting go. Over the next 4 months, I became the best husband I had ever been. I know how that sounds, but hear me out. I wasn't doing it to win her back. I was doing it to buy time and cover. I made her dinner. I fixed the leaking faucet she'd complained about for a year. I told her she looked beautiful, and every one of those small kindnesses did 2 things at once. It kept her comfortable, and it kept her careless. A comfortable person gets sloppy. A person who thinks they've gotten away with it stops covering their tracks, and Victoria stopped covering her tracks. I found the second phone in March. It was in the toe of a boot in her closet, a cheap prepaid thing, and I didn't even go looking for it. I was putting away her winter coats because I'm the one who does that. I've always been the one who does that. I heard it buzz. A boot buzzed at me. And I stood in that closet holding this little plastic phone, and I read a conversation that I'm not going to repeat to you in full, because some of it was about our money, and some of it was about our house, and some of it was about a future the two of them were building on top of my life, like it was an empty lot. They had a plan. That's what got me. It wasn't just an affair. Arthur was leaving his own wife, quietly, expensively, and Victoria was going to leave me, and the plan was for her to get what she was owed first. Her words, get what she was owed. From 9 years of marriage. There was a message where she wrote, I just need to keep him happy till the equity release goes through, then it's done. Keep him happy. I read that, and I remembered every dinner I'd cooked in the last 4 months, and I understood that we had been playing the exact same game against each other, except she thought she was the only one playing. The equity release. That's when I understood the real machine. We owned our house, mostly paid off, and Victoria had been pushing for months to release some equity to invest. With Arthur's firm, of course. A renovation, she called it. An investment in our future, she called it. She'd gotten me to sign a preliminary form the month before, on a Sunday morning, over pancakes, just so we don't lose our spot with the bank. I'd almost signed it fully. I'd had the pen in my hand. Something small and stubborn in me had said, let me read it again this week, and she'd smiled too fast and said, of course, no rush, and her not rushing had been the tell. I just hadn't known what it was telling me yet. Now I knew. The plan was to pull the equity out of the house, funnel it into Arthur's fund, and then leave. I'd be left with a mortgaged shell of a home and a woman gone, and Arthur would have my money and my wife and his big stupid watch, and I would be the last person in the room to understand what had happened to my own life. I sat down at the kitchen table with the boot phone and my regular phone, and I did not text my brother in a panic. I made a list. I've still got it. Old habit. The climate control brain. Item 1, protect the house. Item 2, protect the money. Item 3, protect myself. Item 4, and this is the one I underlined, do not let her see the wall going up. David and I moved carefully after that. I did not touch the equity form. I let it sit. I told Victoria I was still reviewing it with the accountant, which was true, except the accountant I was reviewing it with was my brother, and what we were reviewing was how to make sure not $1 moved. Quietly, over 6 weeks, I separated what could be separated. I opened accounts she didn't know about, funded them from my own salary, all legal, all documented, David watching every step. I changed the beneficiary on my work pension. I made copies of everything on that boot phone, dated, backed up, sealed. I didn't do it to blackmail her. I did it because David said one sentence that stuck to my ribs. He said, when it goes bad, and it will, she's going to rewrite history. The only defense against a liar is a record. And here's the strange part. During those weeks, I fell a little bit out of love with her, and a little bit back in love with my own life. I started noticing things I'd stopped noticing. The smell of the workshop I hadn't touched in 2 years. An old friend, Tom, I'd let slide because Victoria didn't like him. My mother's number, which I'd stopped calling as often because Victoria always sighed when I did. I called my mother. We talked for an hour. She said, "You sound different, Marcus." I said, "Do I?" She said, "You sound like you again." And I had to hang up because my throat closed and I did not want her to hear it. There was a woman named Claire. I want to be careful here because I know how this looks, and I need you to know it wasn't like that. Claire ran the coffee cart outside the building where I did most of my contracts downtown. Warm brown hair, always tied back, always a little flour on her apron because she baked the pastries herself. We talked for 2 years, the way you talk to someone you see every morning. The weather, her daughter's soccer team, the regulars, nothing more. I'd never once thought about Claire that way because I was a married man, and whatever else I wasn't going to be Arthur. But one morning in April, she looked at me handing over my card and she said, out of nowhere, "You seem lighter this week. Something good happen?" And I stood there and I almost laughed because the honest answer was that I'd found out my wife was robbing me, and somehow that had made me lighter. I didn't say that. I said, "Just clearing some things up." And she smiled and said, "Clearing things up looks good on you." And she went back to her cart. That was it. That was the whole thing. But I drove home that day and realized I'd been smiling at a stranger's kindness in a way I hadn't smiled at my own wife in years, and it wasn't guilt I felt. It was grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I'd had. May came. The plan on the boot phone had a date now. Arthur's divorce was finalizing at the end of the month, and Victoria's messages had gotten bolder, sloppier, giddier. "Almost free," she wrote him. "Just the paperwork left on my end." My end. That's what I was now. Paperwork on her end. And I decided that if she wanted paperwork, I would give her paperwork. I did not confront her at a dinner. I did not have friends over and pull out the phone at dessert like they do in the movies. I thought about it. God, I thought about it. I imagined Arthur's face, but David's voice was always there. Control the story, and a public explosion hands the story to whoever cries loudest, and I already knew who cried loudest in our marriage, and it wasn't me. So here's what I actually did. On a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday, I filed for divorce. Clean, complete, with the records attached. I'd already secured the house, the accounts, everything weeks before, so quietly that there was nothing left to fight over that she could win. And then I did the thing I'd been planning since the airport. I didn't tell her to her face. I let her find out the way I found out, through paper. I had David's office serve the papers to her at work, at Arthur's firm. In front of the front desk, she managed, at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, a process server walked in with a manila envelope and asked for Victoria by her full legal name and handed it to her while Arthur was in his glass office, 40 feet away, on a call. I wasn't there. I heard about it later, in pieces. I was, at that exact moment, sitting in a diner 3 blocks away, and I ordered pancakes, of all things. And I ate them slowly, and for the first time in months, I tasted them. She called me 11 times that afternoon. I didn't pick up. Not out of cruelty. David had told me not to, everything through lawyers now. And he was right. But also, I just didn't have anything to say into a phone. She'd said everything I needed to hear on a boot phone in a closet. The 12th call I let go to voicemail, and I listened to it once. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not angry, scared. "Marcus, please, whatever you think you know, it's not. We need to talk. Please, this is insane. You can't just. Please call me. Please." I counted the pleases. There were 4. I texted her one line, the only direct thing I said to her in the whole ending. I wrote, "Keep him happy till the equity release goes through." Her own words, back to her. And then I turned the phone off for the rest of the day. The thing about a quiet plan is that when it lands, it doesn't feel like victory. I keep hearing people describe revenge like it's a warm bath. It isn't. When I turned my phone back on that night in a hotel room I'd rented, because I wasn't going back to that house, I had 31 messages, and I felt hollow, not full. I'd won. And I sat on the edge of a hotel bed, and I thought about her hair on my shoulder, and the bookstore, and the blue cup, and I put my face in my hands, finally, after 4 months, and I let it out, alone, where she couldn't use it. What happened next unfolded fast and ugly on her side, and slow and calm on mine. Arthur's fund needed the equity money more than I'd realized. Turns out the man with the big watch was leveraged to his eyeballs, and Victoria's contribution wasn't a bonus to his plan. It was the plan. When the money didn't come, because there was no money to come, because I'd made sure of it, his interest in her cooled at a speed that would have been comedy if it weren't so sad. Within 3 weeks of his divorce finalizing, he was seen at a restaurant with someone new, someone whose father owned the building his firm leased. Victoria found out the way I found out. She saw a message she wasn't supposed to see. There's a symmetry to it I didn't design, and I take no pleasure in. Okay, a little. She wrote me a letter, a real one, on paper, 4 pages, and I read all 4. In it, she told me she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She told me she'd been lost. She told me Arthur had manipulated her, which was probably even true. Though it didn't make her hands clean, it just meant 2 dirty hands had shaken on it. And at the end, she wrote the sentence that I think about more than any other. She wrote, "I keep setting the table for 2, and then I remember. I keep setting the table for 2, and then I remember. 9 years, and that's the thing that finally reached me, not the pleading. That one small habit her hand still had, of laying out 2 plates for a man who was gone. I didn't write back. I want to tell you I did something noble, that I forgave her in a moving letter, that we sat down like adults. We didn't. I sent her one text weeks later, when the divorce was final and clean, and there was nothing left to fight. She'd texted, for the 100th time, "Can we please just talk? Please." And I looked at it for a long time, and I wrote back, "I noticed everything. That was the problem. You thought I wasn't paying attention. I was always paying attention. Take care of yourself, Victoria." And I meant it, the take care of yourself part. That surprised me most of all. I moved into a small place across town, 2 rooms and a workshop. I called Tom, and we started fixing up an old motorcycle in that workshop on weekends. And I laughed so hard one Saturday that I had to sit down on the floor, and I realized I hadn't laughed like that in maybe 5 years. I called my mother every Sunday. I fixed the half degree of my own life that had been off for so long. And Claire. About 2 months after everything settled, I finally told her, at the coffee cart, that I was divorced. I didn't make it a thing. She was handing me a croissant, and I just said it, plain. I'm not married anymore, by the way. And she went still for a second, and then she said, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm not. And she looked at me, really looked, and said, yeah, I can see that. And it was another month before I asked her to dinner, because I wanted to do it right, slow, honest, nothing hidden, nothing in the toe of a boot, nothing face down on a table. We're taking it slow. She knows everything. That's the whole point now. Everything, out loud, in the light. People ask me, the few people I've told, whether I regret how I did it, whether I should have confronted her, screamed, given her the fight she probably expected. And I always say the same thing. The loudest thing I ever did was stay quiet. She spent 4 months thinking she was fooling a fool, and the whole time the fool was building the door she'd walk out of. I never raised my voice. I never called Arthur. I never posted a word. I just paid attention, and I kept a record, and I finished my coffee. I still have the blue cup. The gas station cup she hated. It's the only thing I took from that kitchen. It's in my new place, handle facing left, because some habits are just good habits, and I decided to keep the ones that were mine. I drink my coffee out of it every morning, and every morning I remember standing in that kitchen at 6, watching a little heart light up next to another man's name, and feeling the whole floor of my life tilt. And I remember that I didn't drop the cup. I finished my coffee. And I want you to know, whoever you are, whatever's lighting up on the phone next to yours right now, that you can survive knowing. You can survive it quiet. You can survive it whole. She thought silence meant weakness. It never did. Silence was just the sound of me deciding to save myself. So I'll leave you where I started. If you'd been standing in that kitchen, would you have noticed? And once you knew, would you have had the patience to stay quiet? I hope you never have to find out. But if you do, I hope you finish your coffee.